of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. One God, amen. Okay. Tuesday night. Gee, there's a lot of you for a Tuesday night. Wow. Can you guys see at the back? Yes? You're all right? Those guys right at the back? I'm sure you're all aware of the life of Tamav Erene from Abu Sufyan convent in Cairo, I should say, Old Cairo, I believe. Okay, so I knew about this topic a week ago, and I've just literally got off a plane from Cairo and from South Africa, and so I've done my best, so please bear with me and be nice, okay? If I miss anything, there's a great book. This is the only one that I'm aware of in English. So when Abuna told me Tamav Ireny, I go, but there's only one book. Like, what, you know? But there's a bit on the internet. So if you interested and you want to continue reading, you'll find it in the Maktaba. Not so hard. And what I share tonight. Now, we're talking about a nun's life to most of us who will not lead this sort of solitary life. So how is that going to impact us? How are we going to extract? Of course, we've got miracles and we've got all those sorts of things that you're all aware of, probably more than me. So my aim is that we find within the story of Tamav Ireny something for our lives today, here and now. So I wanted I'm going to start the night off by asking you, if you are 22 or 23, would you raise your hand, please? Okay. Okay. Tamav Ireny was your age, fill in the blank, when, I like dialogue because it's much healthier, fill in the blank. When Tamav Ireny was 22 years of age, what happened? Have a guess. Yep. Yes, not as a nun, but she became the leader, the abbotess, the head of the, now we're calling them monasteries, but it was convent, so whatever you like, the head of a convent at 22. So this tells us immediately that we can extract from her life something about leadership. Can you imagine? I remember when I was 22, I had 2 kids. How can you make a decision at 18 to join a monastery, convent, and then at 22 be placed in the authority of that convent with all the nuns that have gone before you? She's the youngest in the convent. So it's a bit unusual for this to happen. I'll stop there and rewind 80 years ago. So 80 years is one life, your grandparents, one life. 80 years ago, in a place near Sohag, her mother and father, Yassa and Genevieve, gave birth to a child, and they called her Fawzia. Nice old Egyptian name, Fawzia. During the labor, her mother, very righteous, here it goes, the story always begins, very righteous parents. And this is the other thing I want you to take away tonight. One day, it's about 1 out of 1,000, 1 out of 1,000 Egyptian Copts may take the life of monasticism. 1 out of 1,000. So maybe one of you will take this life. The rest of you will enter into a sacrament of marriage. And it's lovely and it's great that we have nuns and monks and our popes come from the monasteries, but they had parents, and so they have a responsibility. But the greater responsibility will lie with most of us. Without the righteous parents, Tamav Erene doesn't exist. Because when you examine the life of her family, her father and her mother, you find that she took her faith from them. She's the fruits of that sacrament, of that marriage. So the first to be born is Tamav, but during the labor, her mother was in great danger. Now, I don't think any of you have given birth yet, but I can assure you, and my daughter, when she was in labor, when she entered into labor, I said, there will be a point that you think you're going to die. But it will pass, but you will think you are going to die. After about the 12th hour, you are going to die. I can't imagine what it's like. And I've just come out of Egypt, out of really tough areas, the slum areas in Egypt. I have no idea. They don't have great hospitals. They're still giving birth to children in their family beds. What happens when you think you're going to die and there isn't a doctor, a specialist, a gas tank, a epidural, anesthetic, cesarean? What happens is that you raise your eyes and you pray very, very hard. And it's a two-edged sword in the first world. I see it in Africa a lot. We don't even have Panadol for people that are dying. For us, we put our hands in our pockets, we go to the GP, we go to the hospital, casualty ward. But you take all those luxuries, and that's what they are, luxuries, 10% of the world live like us. The rest don't. Then you are on your knees and you raise your eyes and you call upon the God that is very real. For us, the pills, the doctors, the this, the that are very real. We get a little bit lazy with that sort of thing because we have alternatives. But Genevieve on that night had no alternative, and she was going to die. And she prayed, and St. Mary came to her and St. George came to her and touched her, and then Tamav Ireny, Valzea, was born. At that moment, this is coming from Tamav herself, the mother told her later that when you were born, St. Mary said, she's not yours, she's ours. And so Yasser, the father, and Genevieve, the mother of Tamav Ireny, thought in their minds that this child will not live long, because St. Mary has already said she's ours. When she was a toddler, they were on the roof of, as you have in Egypt, the roof with the pigeons and overlooking the palm trees. And the child was running and fell over and then went cold. And the father rushed over and thought, what's wrong with the child? They saw a scorpion, she'd been bitten. And again, he rushed her to the church, and again St. Mary came and the child was healed. This child is ours, not yours. This faith, this blessing on this child came from the parents. So now the first lesson we have is that for us who will be, or are parents, we have a huge responsibility, because one generation can produce Tamav Erene. One. So your grandparents, that length of life, we have to produce. We must continue to produce children with that sort of faith. We have to hand over the faith that we know. So the first lesson that we take home tonight is ask ourselves, how is our faith? When things go wrong, and I know it's hard to sort of predict what it's like to be a parent, but try and think now. This is sort of preschool for parenthood. It doesn't start at the labor ward. It starts now in your own life, so that you can have the right words, the right attitude, the right spiritual life when your children need it. We are starved of good parents that will lead their children. Why do I say that? Sounds a bit hard. Look on that side of the church. I know where they are. Those people aren't here, but they are somewhere else. And another thing we will take away from Tamav Irene's life is that she sought the lost sheep. This was one of her callings. So these are the three things. I've broken it down to three areas. The calling, and each of you have a calling. It may not be to monastic life. We know at the ascension of Christ we have monasticism and we have Moses and Elijah. One is married, one is not. They are different, and we need both. We need both. Both are one is a pure life of monastic life, and one is a pure life of a sacrament of marriage. And we are struggling today. We are struggling to keep our marriages sacred. It's a struggle. Which one is harder, would you think? If we had a discussion now, if we were sitting in a circle, would we debate one is harder than the other? What's harder, married life or monastic life? They're different, but let's talk about purity. Which one is harder? What do you think? Have you thought about it? Most people think that monastic life, yeah, we know there's a struggle, but once you're in the monastery, you're safe. Well, you're not. But don't think a sacrament of marriage makes you safe. If your spiritual life is struggling, you're going to struggle. And we know that because our marriages are struggling. You have to think about this now. A broken marriage means children will grow up with a struggle. That's a fact. So where are the Tamav Irenes if our marriages are struggling? So we have a huge responsibility. Once we're in the sacrament of marriage, it doesn't mean I'm not tempted outside. It's no different. The temptation is the same. They're human on both sides. It's not a chained, you're not chained up. We still have free will, so it's a struggle. In fact, it could be a greater struggle, some may say. Her leadership skills, as I said, 22, head of a monastery. Could you manage to lead a monastery at 22? And we find, and this is not my words, if you read this book and what literature you can find on Tamav Ireny, you will find that she actually led a revolution in a monastery, in a convent. She came in with new ideas that were directed by and through her spiritual life. But it took a great deal of courage, and not just courage on its own, but courage in faith, to take what she believed through her calling and through the leadership she took through her spiritual life, to say, we will change these rules in this convent. And you can imagine the old nuns were like, who is this young person, 22, what does she know? But she changed the face of all convents through this new discipline. And that takes, imagine, at 22, can you lead this group of people, those people that put their hands up that are 22? If I said to you, you will live and lead this group of people, would it be easy or hard? Don't think a convent full of nuns is easier. My goodness, no. They're there because they're tough. They're there because they know who they are, and they're there to fight not just the world but the enemy himself. So they're tough women. And then you put a 22-year-old in the front and say lead. There's got to be some lessons there. There has to be. And every young person, whether male or female, young people, we need leadership. We need leadership skills desperately in these times more than ever. And we'll examine that. So these are the 3 areas. Could have picked 10, but I've picked 3. All those who met her experienced the dignity of a spiritual giant. At 22, her confession father and those who were the elders in the convent saw within a 22-year-old a spiritual giant. A spiritual giant. Can that be said of our lives? Her remarkable simplicity was clothed with magnificent love. So you can see, we see Trump in the news all the time, and his power and what he takes, and snaps his finger, and Russia runs this way, and this is a 22-year-old little person, female, in a very male, if you don't mind me saying, dominated community. Where do you find that leadership if you're coming from the Suhag? Unless it's divinely extracted. So it's a hint for us. We can, all of us, learn leadership, and there's heaps of courses and heaps of books, and look for leadership within the Christian faith. You will find some amazing books. But she didn't even have that. She's been taught from Christ himself. With profound wisdom, can we say, I'm much older than 22, can you say to yourselves you have profound wisdom at your age? Try and jump on the church Lagna and see how far you get with your profound wisdom. How do you prove yourself to have profound wisdom? My goodness. With spiritual insight. Not knowledge, not biblical knowledge, spiritual insight. This means she has spent time with Christ himself. Read all the books you like, get a theological degree. Some people have theological degrees and they're not even Christian. Do you know that? Some in the history of the Coptic Church were illiterate. We are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. Some may have not even been educated. But Christ chooses fishermen. They're seeking and they're drawing whatever they can. Spiritual insight. And with a resolute leadership. Now, what does that mean? That means that a leader will stick to the path regardless of what's in front of them. Add the wisdom, add the life, the spiritual life, but a leader will stick. They say now, they're calling it grit. Most of you probably studied it in university. They're saying grit. When things get tough, the leaders stay. But this little 22-year-old with older nuns telling her, we're not going to change our way. It's been like this for hundreds of years. Who are you? And she, with humility and with patience and 44 years of leadership, guided not just Abu Sufyan Monastery convent, but other convents to live in this way. In fact, the convent, when you look at it back in her day, was quite different. There were nuns that were from rich families, nuns from poor. And the rich families would feed their nuns good food, and they would eat in their room and have their own secluded time. But she was led through her prayers to a life of community, and she evened out everything. And of course there was some, rebellion on this. But she led a revolution. And if you're interested in that kind of revolution, read the book. All being fruits of God's Holy Spirit, which enlightened her and filled her. Tamav, Ireny, and Glorious Horizons in the Monastic Life. That's that book. I think there's only one book in English, part 1. Hopefully someone translates the rest of it. Full of miracles. Okay, so let's look at the calling. Each and every one of you have a calling. You have a purpose. If you haven't read the book Purpose Driven Life, it's 40 chapters. Get it? There's a fast on. Read it. It's very short chapters, but it will allow you to find your purpose. Some of you, as I said, I think it's 1 in 1,000, may monastic life. The majority will be in the sacrament of marriage. What is your purpose within that marriage? Is it just to sort of get through HSC and get to university and then buy the flat, get married, gone, we did it, tick the boxes, KPIs finished? That's not what it's about. Your calling will lie within that marriage. Fatherhood, motherhood, leadership, servanthood. If you aren't serving, serve now before you're a parent, because it will give you the best education on how to deal with little monsters. Some people's, I'm in youth ministry, and I have a granddaughter who's 5, and give me 10 delinquent youth as opposed to 1 toddler. It's tough work. It's tough. And if you have a good, strong spiritual life entering into that sacrament, you will survive. But as I said, we are struggling as families now. And when we struggle as families, we don't produce good fruit. It's a struggle to do that. And we need people like this. And we need good parents. A created purpose. You are created for a purpose. God has, His hands are on you from the moment of your conception. Why are you here? At 22, a quarter of the room put their hands up at the age of Tamav Irene. She knew at 22. So question yourself. Are you sort of still looking? Are you unsure? Then look to your spiritual life. Look to your confession. Look to your communion. Look to the sacraments of the church, because God created you. If it's not working, go back to the God that created you. He knows why. Only He knows. And you can only know. You will not find it from the world. You will not. You'll get distracted and end up somewhere where you shouldn't be. For a 22-year-old, the example of Tamav Irene, her spiritual life was healthy and strong, and at 22, appointed head of a convent. Just think about that for a minute. Imagine 22 as the CEO. Think 100 people you're responsible for. Can you lead at 22? And a committed spirit. As I said, it's courage through faith. People think that there's such a thing as just courage on its own. That will get you into trouble. But courage through faith is completely a different thing. When you know why God has created you, when you hear His voice, when you go where He directs you, you're not even scared of anything in front of you, because He's already there. Nothing can get in your way. On the 6th of October 1954, age 18, became a nun in Abu Sufyan convent. On 15th of October 62, 22 years of age, Tamav Irene was ordained the abbess of Abu Sufyan. Her life was to be focused instead, and this does not change because she's living a monastic life. This description, which are the characteristics of a Christian life, it is not just for monastic living. It is strong vigil on spiritual life. You are part spirit and flesh, most of the time the flesh wins and we worry about that. But what about the other half that is going to last eternally? Prayer, fasting, struggle, purity, poverty, solitude, and stillness. And I want to underline purity. I don't want this to be a talk about purity in monasticism because it's 1 in 1,000. I want to talk about purity in marriage, in the sacrament of marriage. This is a struggle, but we need to concentrate and believe that this is a holy sacrament, and our families are struggling. So rethink, speak to your confession father. There is purity in marriage, and it will produce wonderful children. Many stories reveal how keen she was on returning the lost sheep to their good shepherd. This is not isolated to monasteries. This is us here. On all such occasions, she would pour out her heart to the Lord in prayers, fasting, and matanias for the sake of the lost souls. I ask myself, when was the last time I did a matania for somebody who, again, I'll point to that, you've got to look to that side of the church. It's Tuesday night and it's wonderful that you're here, but where are they? Who's looking for them? And if you aren't, who is? And if you say it's the Father's job, the numbers, do some number crunching. It isn't possible. I don't care how many priests you have in a church. It isn't enough. You will be called for this. You are called for this because that person over there is related to you. It happens all the time in Exodus. Somebody comes in and then they go, I'm related to, do you know this? And everyone's like, everyone just shuffles. Everyone's related somehow to someone in our community. Eventually, one of your family will be sitting there, and their eternity will be threatened. And who is looking for them? So, Tamav Ireny was very well known for her love for the lost sheep and a magnitude of love for them to draw them back home. This, if you really want to be shaken on this point, if you go home with this point, if God calls you to look for the lost, go home and read Ezekiel 34, the whole chapter. It speaks to us. I just took one verse. My sheep wandered through all the mountains and on every high hill. Yes, my flock was scattered over the whole face of the earth, and no one was seeking or searching for them. She didn't leave the convent. You're probably aware, but I'll just, in case you're not, we have deaconesses in our church, and they are outside in the community. They serve the elderly, they serve the orphans, they serve children, they serve sick people. The nuns in black, so the deaconesses could be in brown or blue or light brown, but the nuns are in black and they never leave the monastery. They never leave the monastery unless to go to the doctors and come back, or to die to their burial ground. For Tamav Ireny to be looking for the lost sheep and not leave the monastery, one has to wonder how she did it. That means she was broadcasting, and I'm not talking via Facebook, social media, radio, which we have in our hands today and we don't use for this purpose. She was broadcasting a magnificent love beyond the walls of the convent. And so even till today, if you mention, there's thousands of nuns, but Tamav Ireny in 2017, 80 years after she was born, when I said, how old was she? This young lady knew at 22 that she was in that monastery. She's broadcasting from the other side and encouraging us and teaching us about a purpose-driven life, about leadership. We need leadership now and this sort of service. The lost sheep, they're the ones who aren't here tonight. Do we think about them? Do we wonder where they are? And if you want to see miracles, you can read. The majority of this book is full of miracles, and I could tell you plenty, but you can all read quicker than me, and you have access more than I do. But if you truly want to see miracles, serve the lost sheep. I'll tell you one from here and then one from yesterday. In the book, it tells that, and this is, again, a little person. She was reforming, Tamav Erene was reforming the monastery and building and fixing and renovating, and there was a back gate, and the carpenter came and pulled the gate down, and then, no, I'll tell you two stories because that happened just 2 weeks ago in Africa again. The carpenter didn't come back to put the gate back by the evening. And one of the old nuns came and said, you know, you're taking risks. We're all here in the monastery, and that back gate where the robbers come in, you've left it wide open. What are we going to do? How are we going to sleep? And really reprimanded Tamav Ireny. More than likely, Tamav went to her room and prayed all night. But during the night, that particular nun, her window faced that gate. And she heard noises. And she said, see, I told that young whippersnapper, I'm sure she said, I told her she was putting us at risk. And she looked out and she could hear something. And she thought it was robbers. And so she went straight to Tamav and said, look, I told you. And when they looked out, they saw lights, and it was St. George and Abu Sufyan guarding the gate. And they called out and they said, don't worry, we're guarding the gate, Tamav. Just 2.5 weeks ago, I was in Africa. And this just, as I'm telling you this story, we have one of our parishes in a black township. Within that black township, in the last month, 6 weeks exactly, 60 women were murdered. 60. And in the next block behind us, because we have a preschool, in the next block, 5 children were kidnapped, and we haven't seen them. They're not our preschool, but they were kidnapped, but we have not seen them. So there was a particular man 2.5 weeks ago who was quite vicious, and life is vicious there. It's a very dangerous place. They say that it's the most dangerous place outside of a war zone, so urban danger. This guy came in, didn't like something, and we had a big steel gate, and he got his friends and they pushed it down. And we have a priest and his wife and his 2 little kids live in that property, plus we're there. And you can't pick the steel gate up. It's steel. You can't pick it up. And we all looked at each other and thought, this is not good, because we've had someone jump over the fence the night before. Now the whole gate is missing. But we couldn't do anything about it. There's courage, and then there's courage in faith. And we had to believe. We had no other choice that we were going to be safe that night. And we were, thank God. Yesterday, there was a young girl that on Saturday night, homeless, mental illness, and she has a little dog that she's had for a very long time. And she's not so young, but she's on her own. She isn't like her parents have passed away. And she has this little dog. So she's homeless, and we have her over the weekend. There's roughly, maybe if you're lucky, 55 beds in Sydney for people like that. They're all gone by the weekend, and they don't take dogs. So we didn't have any beds at Exodus, and we didn't have any beds in Sydney. So we were over the weekend thinking, where are we going to put her? Do we put her in our house, which is professionally not the best of things? And then we were working, and then someone walked in who was a member of Exodus himself. And then he said, oh, by the way, Mum said that we have a granny flat that's been available, just vacated, the people vacated 2 days ago, if you need it. And we looked at each other and we thought, God cares for us. Why do we worry? So if it seems that those people that are missing, if you think they're too far gone or you can't find them, don't worry about it. They're God's. But He does call us to be the shepherds, and He calls us to look for them. He wants us involved. And you may not go to Africa, or you may not go, you don't have to. Tamav tells us from her life, you can broadcast. And we have our phones and we have our email, we have so much at our disposal, but are we using it for God's glory? That's a question. So leadership with God, with respect, with commitment, with perseverance, and with character. 44 years of leadership. That's exhausting. When I was in Cairo, we had a conference with His Holiness, and it was about social welfare. And we were sitting, there was about 30 of us in a room. And we had UNICEF and the Protestant Church of Germany, Switzerland, UK, the US. They all help the Coptic Church in Egypt. And as we were sitting there, the attack on the children from St. Samuel Monastery, the news came on His Holiness. He was there when we were there, and we saw the burden of leadership. We must carry that. We can't leave it just to clergy. We can't. It's not the right thing. We are all part of this family. And His Holiness, with such leadership, he could have said anything at that point. And we were in another monastery, and he was worried about us, and he had to organize this and that, and you could see the Hesa running everywhere, monks and bishops, and it was just horrible. But he managed to care about so we've got a busload of children massacred, and he is on the phone dealing with that, and then calling a coach back to Cairo and calling individual cars for every single person that was in that room. Leadership, where does that come from to carry such weight? And he said that these children, this is not an attack. This is from His Holiness. And really think about these words. These are not attacks on Christians. These are attacks on Egyptians and humanity. You see his thinking. He's not separating. Even at that point, he isn't saying Muslim and Christian, or black or white, or rich or poor, or German and Egyptian, or Australian and Egyptian. Each and every soul was important to him that moment. And the burden of that you could see in his body language and his face and how he was speaking. It's not possible for us to carry the burden of these people. But if our spiritual life is healthy and we are in tune and connected with God, we don't have to fear anything. Nothing is impossible with God. We can find, we can heal, we can comfort. But we have a responsibility to make sure that each and every one of us is healthy spiritually. This is the lesson from Tamav Erene, responsible for a whole monastery and those beyond it, and carried it for 44 years. From the beginning of her leadership, our dear Mother Tamav Ireny attempted to reform the community's life and its long-established practices. Indeed, the monastic principles that she sought to establish contradicted those that the old nuns had been used to. You will face opposition, always, in leadership. It will not be easy, and you will be very much alone, you think, but that's when you have to look up. You're never alone. Therefore, our beloved mother faced numerous troubles. Now, contrast this with what the world tells you. It's all about, let's all look the same, let's all do the same thing. It's about trends. It's about, we need to be part of this. Christian life is not like that. It's you and your Creator. And you can conquer the world. Athanasius, contra mundum. If the world is against Athanasius, then Athanasius is against the world. And today, every Christian church recites the creed. And he was a young man, probably younger than some of you here today. So the question tonight, we have to walk away and go, where are the Athanasiuses? Do we have Athanasiuses in the 21st century? Do we have Tamav Erenes? Because they must be amongst us. They must be. And you have a responsibility to examine yourself. Because don't look next to you or behind you or in front of you or to the priests or to the servants. This was a 22-year-old young lady, one of 7 children, the eldest, that knew her calling, knew her purpose, and executed it. There was no, I don't know, I'm not sure. Do we struggle with that? It's a question. Okay, courage through faith. Courage on its own is not the answer. Courage to be uncomfortable, definitely. Courage to do something different. Something different. You are the product, the fruits of 2,000 years of faith. Do you know how many people look to you in the room in St. Bishoy Monastery 2.5 weeks ago? Protestant German, Protestant Swiss, Protestant UK, Protestant America, Canadians are there working with us and admiring, I can't tell you how much, orthodoxy. We are very, very blessed. And I speak for myself, we take it for granted. And I was sitting here just earlier on, and because I've just come from Cairo, the old churches, you go there and you're breathing in bukhor that's been risen for centuries. You sit in pews that are hundreds of years old. You go to monasteries that have been knocked down and rebuilt time and again. And you carry all of that with you. You are very special people. You are very special. And you must never forget that. You're carrying 2,000 years of faith because the person behind you gave it to you. Tamav Erene is a product of Genevieve and Yassa. 80 years ago, that's it. And if we go 80 years in the future, will the children then, will we find Tamav Erenes? Will we find Athanasiuses? And don't look and say it's his fault or their fault or this one's or that. It will be yours. You will be the parent of those children. And will you be executing an example to carry it another 20 years? You've got it 2000. The weight is on you. You've got 20 years. That's it. Are you ready to carry it for 20? Will this church be sold like the God forbid, the uniting church that I have, St. George Church was a Lutheran or something like that. Will we be selling after we've built? Because us will not sustain it. But if we gather those people, we will. Okay, courage. Most people think courage looks like that, but it really looks like that. It's easy to look tough and it's easy to look courageous because we're fed this image. But go to places where you're uncomfortable. If you want to witness Christ, if you want to witness miracles, like what's in this book, you must serve. Serve one person and you will see miracles. Serve one person and you will be at the foot of the cross. If we say, like in the story of Saint Bishoy, just came from Saint Bishoy Monastery, and of course we sit and we think, we all know the story. He's going to appear, Christ is going to appear on the mountain. He tells the monks, they all run up and they pass the old man. If I tell you now Christ is going to appear at 7-Eleven down there in 2 hours, and you believe me, you'll drop everything. And yet the Christ that you seek is in those people. They're in the ones that aren't here tonight. They're in the relatives that don't engage with Christ anymore. Forget Africa and Thailand and Fiji and Queensland. It's here. Your mission is here. And you will be asked about it because you've been given all of this. You will not get away with it. I'll be harsh. You can't have 2,000 years of heritage, faith. Be surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. Each one of these, you know their names. You're named after these people. And you have books and servants and popes and bishops. And then we say, well, we don't know enough, or it's not up to us. Unfortunately, you will be asked because you've been given the best. You can't get the best degree and then not be asked to use it. That doesn't make sense. So you have been chosen. My family were not chosen. Ask yourself, why was yours? Must be for a reason. So her life was to be focused instead on vigil, prayer, fasting, struggle, purity, poverty, solitude, service, and stillness. Quite accessible to people who are married. This is not isolated to monasticism. In fact, if Tamav Erene had to broadcast out of the convent into the world, are we not where she's broadcasting to? We're here. We're placed here because that's where we should be. We have been created to be here. If you're created to be and purposed to be in the monastery, good, God bless you, go. But guess what? 999 of you will not go. So you're going to live in the world, and you are in the world, and this is your field. A ship is safe in harbour, but that's not where ships are for. They're not built to stay in the harbour. The World Mission Board actually says that the hotspot for mission now, that's a blank, fill in. Where's the hotspot for mission globally? Where do you think it is? Pick a country. Nope. Nope. Actually, faith is being witnessed in Syria. Amazingly. Where? Asia? 3,000 people are baptized a day in Asia. Actually, the World Mission Board tells us that the hotspot of mission are in university campuses. It's not a ticket away, it's where you study. The world, God knows our laziness. He said, okay, don't worry about the four corners, I'll bring you the four corners to you. Go to any university in this country and what will you find? International students. Is this a coincidence? Can't be. Is this not where you spend your life for a good 4 years? Maybe this is it. Maybe that's why you're doing optometry. Maybe that's why you're doing medicine. That's why you're being a teacher in public schools. Gosh, I wish a Coptic person, actually, I shouldn't say that. I'll say it. I was going to say, I wish a Coptic person was in my public school when I was a kid. So I went to Moorfield High School. It's probably the worst school in the country. You didn't go there for an education, you went there to survive every day. The only Egyptian person in that school was a Copt who was my age in my class, and that's why I'm here today. And she wasn't a good Copt. She wasn't a Sunday school teacher. She wasn't anything special, but she had something that I could see that I wanted, and that's all she did. She didn't even preach. But she lived a life that was different, that I was searching, and that's how it is that I'm here talking to you. So you're there, you're out there, you're in schools and universities and workplaces. So if you were of the world would love its own, yet because you are not of the world, but I choose you out of the world. Monasticism or the world, it's the same mission. The monasteries are filled by those in the sacrament of marriage. They pray for us to do the work on the outside of the walls. Don't go away and think I'm not that servant, I'm not that missionary, I'm not that Christian, I'm not that imitation of Christ. You are. Maybe you don't know it yet, but you are. No one here in this room was born without a purpose. Not any of you. The least me. And I'm talking to you, and he found me over there in the worst school in the country. So we need each other. And those people need, I can't tell you how much. Those people, my goodness, they need you. And maybe you're speaking the language that they can understand. And it's not Arabic and it's not Chinese. It's actually today's language. English, Australian language. Maybe you've got it. And you've just got a flavour of Christ that can be mixed with their everyday life. And you can call them in. Don't preach. St. Francis of Assisi would send his monks out and say, go and preach the word of God, and if you have to use words, please do. I'm not talking Bible bashing on corners. I'm talking about a compassionate, magnificent love for your fellow man. I'll tell you one story and then I'm going to finish. At Exodus, we have university students that have to do their placement for social work. Most of them are doing their masters. They have to do 500-600 hours for free, which is great for us because we get free workers. So the universities call us, and because most organisations in this field are Christian-based, but you don't say that these days because you don't get grants. If you put Christian faith, forget the grant, unfortunately. we do, and we get the grants, but that's another thing. So the university rang and said, we have a student, she's Muslim, African, and we can't get a placement anywhere. Will you take her? And we've had this before, and we always go, because we're Christian, of course we'll take her. And so Sarah has done 500 hours with us. And I don't have it here, but at the end of her placement, and even during, she said, even my own people don't accept me like you people accept me. What is it about you that I came here fearful because you're Christian and I'm Muslim, but I'm more at home with you? And I go, why do you think that is? And she said, because you love me. Everyone loves me here. That is magic. That's the gospel. Did she convert? I don't know. But she's living, we plant the seed, and God, we have to plant a seed. We have to. And God will make it grow in time. And like myself, it happened over a period of time. You don't wake up one morning and go, yes, I want to be Coptic. Definitely not 40 years ago. But God has plans, and so who knows? But she certainly knew the love of Christ, and she spoke about it, and I have it on tape. Think of that person, maybe the closest person to you that's not here, maybe the student at uni, maybe the work person at work. Who knows? So the bottom line, and I'm finished, is you are a ship. Leave the harbour. Please. Glory be to God forever. Amen. Take my book. I found the book. I had to dig out. Where is that book? I just got home and Abuna said, there is one book. I go, yes, but can I find it? Thank you. I don't think so. You can hear me.
Any questions, guys, before Debbie leaves? Any questions for her? Thank you so much, Debbie. It's very inspiring, very beautiful, deep. When we chose that topic, obviously we wanted to give honor to our church mothers, as we said earlier, but I think Debbie did an amazing job in actually benefiting us from Tamav Ireny. I recommend her movie. It's in Arabic, but it's got English subtitles that really moved me personally. But I think the way that Debbie was talking, obviously, broke it down so she can relate to what we can do in everyday life. Because when we talk about church fathers or church mothers or saints, we think they are from a different planet and we can't relate to them, and that was, in their times. But we talk about, a saint here who only passed away a few years ago. So she lived in our, modern day time. That's why we chose one to be, so we can say in our time. So thanks again, Debbie, for that.